Postmodernism in literature. So defining postmodernism can be a little bit difficult, but I'm going to give you my definition, and then hopefully as I go through a little history of postmodernism and some of the characteristics that it has in literature, you'll get to understand why I'm defining it in the way that I am. So postmodernism is a cultural movement that denies an absolute objective truth. Reality or the truth is formed on an individual basis from how one interprets the world around them. And because all truth is then subjective, because we each create our own, there is no standard to measure truth or reality against. Okay? So, to give you a little bit of perspective, postmodernism starts around the late 1950s or to 1960s and is continuing on to the present day. We really haven't left postmodernism yet. Now, for a bit of history, we kind of have to go back and look at modernism, all right? So if you remember, modernism started at around the time of the Industrial Revolution and the World Wars around the turn of the 20th century, okay? So just as those big cultural changes caused many people to challenge their preconceived notions about institutions, society, religion, and truth, the proliferation of media in all of its forms that kind of really started in the late 1950s and 1960s kind of has led to postmodernism. And the main question that kind of started coming around that time was, what is real? All right, so as an example, just as two people can witness the same event and interpret it in different ways, so can two people engage with a text or image and see it differently. And it's really this inability to reconcile different perceptions that is at the heart of postmodernism and what leads to its sense of fragmentation and disjointedness. So postmodernism isn't just a way of viewing art, whether that's a piece of artwork or a film or a piece of literature. It's really a way of thinking about life. How do you reconcile such two different perceptions of things that are going on around us? All right, now one other area where postmodernism really broke away from modernism is really with Western thought. So even though modernism challenged the notion of what truth is and kind of laid the groundwork for postmodernism in this way, modernism still embraced kind of Western society values and belief. It still kind of had faith in them and cherished them, even at the same time as it was challenging the institutions that perpetuated those beliefs in the Western society structure. All right, however, postmodernism's biggest break with modernism is really over Western values. Because in postmodernism, truth is relative, that means there's no reason to cherish Western values over other ideologies, okay? So the dismissal of kind of this cultural allegiance a little bit to the Western civ in a way is what opens up postmodernism to other influences not typically predominant in Western thought before. So one other thing where postmodernism kind of breaks a little bit with modernism as well is that altogether postmodernism is more of a movement about the individual self rather than society. So sometimes modernism is more about the self in society and trying to reconcile that and make sense of that or understand what society is going through and what has happened to it. If you kind of look at the reaction to the Industrial Revolution or the World Wars, that was something that was very much on the mind of the modernists. But the postmodernists have kind of rejected that and are really just focused on the self. Because if we all live in our own little reality and have our own truth, there's not much purpose in trying to conform to someone else's truth or reality, or in other words, trying to conform to society's version of reality. All right, so that's a brief history kind of the thought of postmodernism. How does this come about in literature? Okay, so I'm going to give you 4 characteristics of postmodern literature. Now, something can be postmodernist in literature and have all 4 of these, or maybe just 1 or 2 of them. It's not like every single work will have all of these, but the 4 characteristics I'm going to focus on are randomness, fragmentation, playfulness, and self-reflection. So randomness kind of comes from the belief that there's no absolute meaning in anything. So postmodern writers will sometimes focus on chaos or disorder in their stories. And a lot of times that's reflected in the fact that there may not be a clear resolution to the story or a clear point. Instead, the reader is just left to come up with their own response to the story. The second characteristic is fragmentation. In writing, fragmentation can be seen where there are strange jumps in time or setting, or weird changes in a character's personality that kind of seem to come up a little bit out of nowhere at times. So this technique is meant to emphasize the disjointedness of how we sometimes perceive life to be. Now, the third characteristic is playfulness. Now, in postmodernism, playfulness is not meant to be kind of like fun and whimsical. Rather, they're employing what's called dark humor or irony, which is often used to point out the futility of something, or even sometimes the less savory side of human nature, or the randomness of it, or basically just pointlessness. All right, the fourth characteristic is self-reflection. Because postmodernism places a lot of emphasis on the self and our individual perceptions of the world around us, postmodernism will often have a quality of reflection about it. This is usually given through the narrator. Sometimes it's given from the first point of view if the writer's writing in I statements. So a lot of times you'll see an emphasis on analyzing the main character's thoughts or views, maybe even a stream of consciousness to it, and sometimes there will be a wondering of how their perception differs from someone else's. And usually that will take the form of wondering how they're viewing something differs from how another character or how society is viewing a situation. All right, I hope this helps you understand postmodernism a little bit more.